to you, Dev.
Thank you, Aleem. While I share my screen, and please let me know that you can see it. I don't know what you can see.
We can see your good project governance slide. Yep, we can see it.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you. So this presentation is really a very high-level overview of my expectation of what good project governance is all about. It should meet with what most other people think project management is about. Governance is about. Well, let's start the process. So I've just included here a very brief summary from APM as to what governance is, and it's very important to get that right. So I'll move on to the next slide. We've gone through this. This is just a brief summary of who I am and what I've been doing. So what is project governance? Well, firstly, it's not project management. And I think that we made very, very clear. I mean, project governance is about an oversight. It is about ensuring that the right projects get done well. And I'll explain that shortly. And that the project does what it needs to do, that there is a defined framework, that there is clear accountability. And it typically covers three key categories: people, structure, and information. So that's what project governance is. Project management is about the day-to-day running, planning, organizing, and delivering a project. So the two are very, very different. And I think this, the image on the right sort of gives a good flavor as to what the two different areas are. Project governance is all about leadership, planning, communicating, managing, controlling, and assuring, so that the people who are doing the governance should be doing all of those things. And it is also about providing that level of confidence that the project is being done well. Any questions before I move on? Okay. So I mentioned three categories, and the next three slides are really about what those three categories are and what the relevant elements of governance are. So the first one there is leadership. This is a very, very important element because without clear leadership and without having an empowered sponsor, someone who has skin in the game and who can champion the project, it's very difficult to get a project delivered well. The empowerment should also go on to the rest of the board, the project board that's governing the project. There should be an element of strategy as well. So the project should link to the overall organization's objectives, because if you can't kill a project down, and that's one of the first things that I tend to do as a project manager when I pick up a project is, can I actually stop the project? And if I'm able to provide enough rationale to stop a project, that means the project really didn't have any legs to stand on. So there's a big element there about ensuring that if you can provide the rationale for having the project and can continue the project, then that's a clear element of governance there. Having a vision and purpose, which is linked to understanding why you're delivering the project and how it's linked to the objectives and what happens if it fails, if it delivers late. So effectively, what we're talking about here is delivering a business case. So that's the key element about leadership. The second is having engaged stakeholders. Now, your stakeholders could be anyone from frontline staff who will end up delivering and using what your project is delivering, to the CEO, to shareholders, to external observers, etc. So all of those are stakeholders. The key stakeholders, the engaged stakeholders I'm talking about here, are the ones who will actually be directly impacted by the project and who effectively will probably be on the board as well. And if they are on the board and if they have an impact on the project, then there needs to be a shared understanding of the project. They need to know what the scope is, what the requirements are, what the benefits are likely to be, as well as knowing the risks, issues, and budget constraints, etc. So they need to be very clear about how the project will impact them, and they are there to also provide support to the project manager or to the project team. They're also there to challenge and say, why are we doing this, and are we doing this in the right way or not? The third element is roles and responsibilities. there needs to be some clear accountability of doing what and why they're doing that. It's also a case of having some clear boundaries, and this is where something like a RACI diagram comes in very handy, where you're looking at your responsible, accountable, informed, and I can't remember what the last C was. But anyway, it is about ensuring that you have some clear boundaries, and that the people who are actually doing the work are empowered and enabled. So from the accountability perspective, you've got a project board, project manager, you've got your project team, you've got your CEO, you've got your project sponsor, you've got your main supplier, you've got your main customer. So all of those elements need to be included when you're looking at roles and responsibilities. I'm happy to move on to the next slide if there are no questions.
Yeah, there is one question, Dev. So
sure.
Before we do, and Mark, by the way, in the chat has mentioned that C is for consulted, so he's covered that. Thanks, Mark. So a question is from Nish to everyone. She's still querying what the difference between governance is, what you're covering, and project management, if I've understood the question correctly. So the difference between governance and what we're saying here, and obviously what some people do in project management. And before I pass it over to you, Deb, and maybe some other mentors, what I just add is, of course, some people doing project management do good governance, right? But this is something bigger, hence why maybe there's some confusion between the governance and PM part. So if you could pick that up, Deb, first.
Okay, yeah, sure. I'll pick it up first. So yes, there is an overlap between governance and management, but there is also a clear distinction between them. And I think sometimes it's very difficult to especially for smaller projects, to see that there is a difference there. But it is all about the governance is about ensuring that there is a strategic need, there's a direction, and that there is oversight over a project. Whereas project management is done by someone who's actually delivering the project and doing all of the day-to-day running, making sure that the code is being written, is being delivered on time, and all of those elements. Identifying risks and issues, and if they can resolve them, great. If they can't, then they will escalate that to the governance level, so that at the governance level, they can say, well, okay, we actually have access to a wider set of stakeholders or a wider set of skills that can then be used to address those issues. So that's my description of what governance is. I'm happy to hand over to the others.
Yeah, is there anyone else who wants to just add something?
I think I'll just add one small thing, which is to add upon what Dad's saying. So governance is about giving, he said this before, giving confidence that you know what you're doing, how you're doing it, when you're doing it. But fundamentally, you're demonstrating to the senior stakeholders, perhaps the sponsoring group, the ExCo, that you have got this under control, because you're doing it within a delivery framework, and the framework is often referred to as a governance framework, because that way you are being consistent in the way the organization does things, in the way in which your sector does things, and therefore they can have the increased confidence that it's being managed. Or if it's not going to plan, that there isn't a mechanism to turn around and get it back to green. So that's kind of another way of saying what Dev's just said.
I've also got maybe sort of illustratory way to sort of look at it, because essentially view of government is the fact that it's a framework which defines when key project management decisions are made. So essentially, if you see them as quality gates and key milestone review points along the life cycle, not just of the project, but pre-project and post-project. So typical example would be, to illustrate it, you're walking along a path. The path is what you need for your project to start up, and what it would need through the life cycle, and what it would need afterwards, post-production and support and maintenance. And essentially, it's at key stages along that project path, you have to go in, you have to get approval, and you have to get sign up and sign off or approval of certain elements at each stage. So it's going through that path, getting those sign-offs, you're going through quality gates essentially, and then getting approval to move to the next stage. And it's all those which essentially is what governance is. It's all about decision making at each point in the project lifecycle, including the pre-project and the post-project.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. I think it's kind of clearer to me. I think the reason I got confused was because on the next screen, we talked about a couple of things that make good governance. And I thought, oh, isn't that stuff you do as part of a project? So that's the sort of things like having stakeholders and roles and responsibilities, all those activities I thought would have been part of project management, hence my confusion. Yes. But I think it's kind of clearer to me.
Yeah. Yes, and for most it is, right? For a lot of people, they do it, but it's good to bring it out as a topic in itself, because actually we know that a lot of people don't do good governance in projects, in that, you know, many projects fail, don't they? Or they, when I say fail, you know, they're over time, over budget, etc., etc. But yeah, I think we've addressed that one. Let's move on with your slide, Dev, if we can. And then obviously if we need to come back to this after, we can again.
Sure, that's fine. Okay, so the next element is the structure side of things. And this is about providing direction. Now, direction is not the same as project leadership or what a project manager does. This is about that strategic context. It is about ensuring that there is that link with the corporation and with the organization, as opposed to just delivering what the project is meant to deliver. There is an element of having accountability, clear ownership. So, for example, it would go from the corporate board to the project board to the project manager to the project team. That's typically how I would see accountability being passed down. And Tola mentioned framework. It is about having that framework of policies and processes that need to be delivered, so that that need to be adhered to, so that the project can be delivered. There's also an element about planning. And yes, this is done at a project management level, but there is also an element that needs to be done at a governance level. Before you even get a project going, do the stakeholders or do the board know what needs to be done? Are there some clear milestones? Are there some clear deliverables? Do we know how we're going to measure that we've been successful? Have we identified our benefits, etc., etc.? So all of those elements are bits that need to be done, typically when you're capturing them as part of a business case, right before the project is set up. And then you've got your assurance side of things, which is about scrutiny and approval. Now, as a project manager, my tag there, that a project manager has more authority, except that's provided by the board, because a project manager will be given the authority by a project board to deliver a project within certain constraints. So while decisions on a day-to-day level will be made by the project manager, at a more strategic and higher level, those decisions would need to be made by the project board. So as an example, on many of my projects, well, I, as a manager, have been responsible for putting together a proposal or an options analysis and presenting the options to the board. It's the board that makes the decision to actually on which of the options to go with. And that's typically for larger bits of work. So that's that. Any questions on that one?
Yeah, so we've just had another person join, so thanks for that. And I see, Sonali, you have your hand raised, so I don't know if that's deliberate or not, but do you have a question, Sonali? Let me unmute you, just in case. Sonali, is that deliberate? You have your hand raised? Okay, Sonali, I'll lower your hand using the function in Zoom. If you do have a question or want to speak, please, raise your hand again, or just ask in the chat window. Any other questions for Dev?
Okay, I'll move on.
Okay.
So the third element is information. And the first key thing that is mandatory and is the foundation for most projects. It's communicate, communicate, communicate. And this is about making sure that you're passing the information on, you're getting information back from people. So I've got it down as observe, report, and listen. So on the observe side, it's as a project manager or if you're looking at governance here. So from a board perspective, it is keeping an eye on the project. making sure that risks and issues are correctly identified, making sure that the constraints are kept to. So that's the element around the observe side. On the report side is ensuring that you're getting some clear reports, simplified and standardized reports that you as a board can understand, because a lot of people who sit on project boards are not project managers. They don't have those qualifications or knowledge of project management. What they are business people, and they're people who understand the business and how things operate. So you need to report it, provide reports to their levels, and keep things simple. It's something I've also included under the process side of things, but it is about keeping things simple and straightforward. There's also an element of transparency, having readily available information and data, having honest reporting and decision making, and not hiding risks and issues. I mean, I've joined projects where risks and issues, there are two types of risks and issues, ones that the project manager keeps and ones that are presented to the board. That's terrible practice, and that's what really causes problems to projects. When there are changes to deadlines, or when this project, when the scope changes because the business wants something new, all of those things really need to be tracked and managed and kept available to everyone to see. And then, of course, again, that was mentioned earlier earlier on by some of the others, it's the process side of things, which is the mechanisms, the guidelines, the frameworks, all of those elements that you need to adhere to and make sure that the project is on track and keeping up with. I think I've only got one more slide after this, so I'll move on to that. And just to sort of illustrate this, I've got some examples of good and bad practice regards to governance. I mean, I've worked on a project where we had 14 board members, most of them who were on there because they were senior people, and so you can't keep senior people off a board, and because they're expected to be. Did they have anything to do with the project? Not really. Could they add any value to the project? Nope. Did they care about whether the project would be delivered? Absolutely not. So one of the first things I did on taking over the project manager was get rid of everyone on the board. In fact, just get rid of the board with the help of the project sponsor and getting the right people into the board. 4 levels of governance. I mean, this is typically something that you would come across in public sector. So you've got your project board, and you've got your departmental board, and then you've got your cabinet office, and then you've got your treasury. And all of those people typically have something to say about your project and program, especially if they're funding it. So sometimes there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of over-assurance. And that really tends to slow slow down a project and increase the chances of failure. Or having a sponsor who's inherited the project because someone's moved on. They've started a project, it's a 2-3 year long project, but they've moved on because they've got a promotion or something, and the next person who picks it up really doesn't care about the project. They've got their own agenda, and so the project tends to start sitting on one side. Nothing happens very much with it. Yes, you'll have your project board, but there isn't any real energy behind the project. And then the final one was a project that I picked up, which was failing. It had been failing for a couple of years. Millions had been spent on this project, but because millions had been spent and because it was a vanity project for someone, nothing was being done about it. And I was given the task of actually revitalizing it and getting it delivered. In the end, I just killed the project because there really was no business case for it. It took a lot of hard work and a lot of negotiation and discussion, but we finally managed to get it done. On the good practice side, I mean, I think it was easier for me to come up with bad practice examples than good practice examples, but certainly having a clear business case from the beginning. This is much easier for smaller projects because you want something specific, or you want a specific update to a system, etc. Those kind of things are really easy to have a clear business case. But when you're running larger projects and programs, it is a bit more difficult to have that business case, except at a very high level. I set up a program where we had 3 members to begin with, which was the project sponsor and the 2 customers who were going to be impacted by the project. We then grew that board as more and more people came on board, but essentially just having those 3 people on made sure that the program boards were focused, simplified, and straightforward, and very rarely lasted longer than an hour. And then having streamlined reporting and assurance, and that's linked to that 4 levels of governance. I mean, just cutting things down, not doing away with assurance, because assurance is absolutely essential, but ensure that, you have enough assurance that you have someone to say and quality check you and make sure, are you actually doing the right thing? Are you doing it the right way? And are you meeting all of the requirements? And then having a board with skin in the game. You definitely need someone in there, a board that has that. You definitely need someone, a board that has that, because they will then have that energy. They will then be proactive in ensuring that the project gets delivered. That's it.
Great, thank you, Dev. So we'll open up for questions now, but actually before we do, just for me to comment on that last slide. So I really appreciated that last slide, and just as you said, most of us, if we're being honest with ourselves, have experienced far more bad practice, whether we've been involved in it directly or just seen it from afar, than good practice, right? So even though it's common sense, all good stuff, I'm sure we would agree that more often than not, for different reasons, the good practice or the good examples are not followed. And the slides that you presented before this, of course, are a lot of that really good stuff that people should be doing in their processes, people, structure, etc. That, of course, will enable good practice. So thank you for that. So let's open it up to questions and having a discussion with everyone involved. So I'm going to unmute you all, but if it doesn't work from my side, please unmute yourself. And feel free to ask Dev and other mentors anything you like.
Hi, Dev, it's Alistair here.
Hi there.
Previous slide, we talked about the communication aspect of it. Maybe I missed it. There wasn't any reference to kind of artifacts, project artifacts to aid in the communication, kind of an appropriate level of documentation that's required. So do you believe that documentation has a strong part in it, or that it's kind of unnecessary project red tape?
Documentation is never unnecessary. I mean, I think from my perspective, you definitely do need documentation, but I think you need to be pragmatic about the level of documentation you need. I mean, it really depends on the type of project. I mean, I've had to deliver system improvement projects where we're setting up and implementing a brand new system. From that kind of perspective, then you do need a lot of documentation, because it is about how the system needs to be set up, how the system needs operate. It is about ensuring you've got your learning and development guides in place. Certainly, because there were multiple delivery teams, getting feedback back from them was quite important. And having a simple, straightforward way of doing that was also quite important. Having change control, that's part of your documentation. That is also a critical element, especially for some of the bigger projects. How do you track what your changes are? And how do you track what the impact of those is going to be? And how do you then get that level of assurance from your governance board or from people who are managing you to say that you are doing the right thing? Documentation is really the only way that allows you to provide that evidence.
Okay.
Others, Ian, I know you're going to be doing this presentation, for example. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, Alistair, the key thing I find with governance boards is that is consistency. First of all, if it's a scheduled cycle of governance that you make that, make sure that happens. I suppose a monthly is often the case. But also, you have to be cognizant that the stakeholders are often stakeholders on multiple programs and projects. So consistency with the schedule, consistency in terms of what you are presenting to them, give them 48 hours notice of any material going into the meeting. Just practical tips like that, give them a chance to consume it, and also. Consistency with as Dev mentioned during the presentation, that you are very much a facilitator at these stakeholder meetings, and that a good sort of minuting and noting of key actions that have been taken by the boards is key, and circulating that to the stakeholders and make sure everyone's in agreement on it, because you can often refer back to those, especially when there's some critical decisions that have been made. So that's just a few thoughts I had.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian. Alistair, does that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up question on that?
Yeah, it was kind of a rhetorical question. I completely agree with everything that the guys have said. It was just that under the communication, I didn't see any reference to artifacts, but I think that's where a lot of projects fail. If you go back and try and retrospectively understand why some decisions were made, if there's no documentation, then no one has any idea why those decisions were done, why things were done that way.
So, Alistair, it's Gary. Sorry, I was just going to add on to what Ian and David both said, and it's very much in line with, Alistair, where I think you're going, and correct me if I'm wrong. It's about tailoring, because every organisation is slightly different, and therefore what works in one doesn't necessarily work in the other. And it's about effectively doing what you need to get the decisions made. But as you quite rightly say, you need to keep a record of that, so that if you come in late, you can understand the history behind it all. So I'm going to give 3 examples. I've just recently rolled off a massive transformation piece of work for Dixon's Carphone, huge. And Dixon's Carphone is a retail organisation. They don't do projects. That's not what they do. So I had to walk in and I had to set something up. So at the one end, I had the Exco board once a month. And you can imagine that's quite scary in front of however many people. At the other end, I had small project teams. So I had to put something that was appropriate. And one of the things that my client said to me was, look, we sell TVs. So whatever you do, don't try and kill us with governance and process, and make it appropriate. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Every organisation will be able to give you a steer as to what will and won't work for them.
I mean, I'll just add to that, because essentially I said it was a path from, you know, your conceptualization of the project down to doing the project, and then looking at it from a support service transition point of view. Each of those stages will require you to make a decision along the way. And most of those decisions are governed by forums, decision boards, which you may have to set up or are already in existence. Each of those forums which actually approve those decisions should have the associated documentation which they require. And they're normally part of the memorandum of understanding of actually going through each of those, either boards which already exist within the organization, or boards which you may have to set up. So a typical example would be, for instance, if you were initiating the project from the onset, that may go through an initial program board where the projects have already been shaped. And then you may have to now start doing a strategic business case. And then you go for, and that would be a point. And at that point, there will be a forum, and there should be a memorandum of understanding associated with that forum, which identifies what it's there for, what documentation it requires. Then you go through the next step, which probably is your outline business case, where you are now looking at monetary aspects which have to approve. You've got to do a full design. So you may actually also have to consider getting your design signed off, also getting the money signed off. And then you find out that maybe that money is over a certain threshold. You may have to go through to another board. But all that information, all that step through as you make those major decisions should be defined as part of your governance process, which essentially defines the various boards they go through with memorandum of understanding associated with those boards. And actually it also identifies what information is required. That is, do you provide at that point, do you provide a financial plan? Next stage, do you provide a design document? Do you provide all that? So I think what we mustn't do is mangle this up with project management, as somebody said earlier. It's about key decision points within the life cycle of the project, but it also considers pre-project as well as post-project, even support and maintenance, operational maintenance and all that, and the decision points you need at that stage as well.
Okay, thank you. So look, I'm going to say something controversial, and deliberately so, just to leave you all with a thought around this. So I don't mean it 100%, so don't shoot me down after, but then we'll move on to next question. And the point I want to raise is that actually communication is something that I've seen more often than not being done really badly. If there's one area that's cut when everyone's up against it and something needs to be delivered and people are behind deadlines, is they stop communicating and they stop doing, you know, what they're meant to be doing, and decisions are made without everyone knowing, etc., etc. So of course I agree that, you know, appropriate communication at different levels needs to be done, but sometimes there is an overload of communication, and then they try and do so much, and then, as I said, when deadline's near, actually it all stops and people stop communicating. And what I've seen work more successfully is actually using technologies such as Slack and Teams. And what I'm seeing is that a lot of communication now is done more spontaneously, more ad hoc, not in these governance forums, etc. But decisions are made. There is still a log, but it's done differently. So controversially, I'll say, you know, maybe less documentation, especially if they're big documents, and the use of technology and working with more agility actually is what I've seen work more better, if you like, recently. But anyway, like I said, I'm saying that deliberately controversially. Let's move on to another question if someone has it.
Just before we do, Alim, just to say, I don't think that's controversial at all. I think you are spot on with that. And absolutely, documentation is important. But as I said earlier, it's got to be pragmatic and realistic. We don't want to over-document, but we do need to have some documentation. And yes, you're right. It is becoming a bit more sporadic. It is becoming a bit more intuitive as we go, as technology comes in. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's controversial at all.
But communication at the right level, right? I think we're all saying similar stuff. So let's move on. So from Alistair or anyone else, any other questions, any other points that you would like to discuss? And just remembering that you are all on mute, so unmute yourself first or use the chat function, please. Any other questions?
Just on the communication front, I think one would have anticipated that you'd create a stakeholder management plan up front, and that will actually define how you communicate with each of your stakeholder groups based on influence and interest. And hopefully that should be resolved up front as you go through the project process.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So other questions, other discussion points?
This is Jay. I'm just wondering, like, I mean, particularly something around the lines of frameworks. There are lots out there, and I mean, some of the things which are which provides the foundation of all these practices. In some cases, common sense, but then yet there are tons of framework that that's available out there. Is there a best practice or something something that is considered, like, say, maybe gold standard, or something that would be more widely utilized, that could be something that we can learn from and use?
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Jay. And before I open it up, let me just ask you, actually, if I may, what framework are you currently using, or have you been using in your last role, and how's it working for you?
It's generally, like, I mean, the reliancy is on COBIT, but it's generally more on the entire IT practices, not particularly in project management. And that's where the confusion lies, because if you're particularly just focusing on project management, are there practices that I should be following, or generally, like, whatever the IT framework has been set up by the organization is reliant on COBIT, and should I be just, like, using some of the things, adopting from there? Because that's what I mentioned. It's just generally best practices. That's it. Yeah. I mean, it's not something rocket science that we need to reinvent. But when it comes to, like I mentioned, in the IT space, okay, there is COBIT utilized, and that's an extension taken on and adopted into project management. Yeah. So I'm just wondering what advice can somebody provide on that?
I can just give you a bit of insight. COBIT is for your business as usual, day-to-day operation within the organization, because you've got to understand that the project is a temporary construct. You've actually got to potentially create the governance process or key into what already exists if it's part of a major program. If it's part of a major program, there should be some sort of governance structure in place, and then your project will key into that. If there isn't, you may have to set something up. But also remember, because you are authorizing different aspects as you go through the program project life cycle, because you are going to be authorizing the money spend, you're going to be authorizing the design, you're going to be authorizing service introduction as well as service transition. So what you may have to do is actually piece together bits of governance which actually cover that complete life cycle of your project and program, and then add those quality gates in as you go along the piece. But CORBID is for your business as usual operational and your organization, whereas a project, because of its temporary nature, you may have to put those aspects in place as part of your delivery.
Okay,
and
yeah, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, and just to add to that, so I think when looking at, Jay, what you're asking about best practice, it's about best practice project management. And absolutely, there are several different sort of best practice guides out there. I mean, I don't know very much about COVID, so I think Tola has addressed that as best as she can. But certainly from your perspective, it is about being pragmatic. It is about being realistic. There is PMI, there is APM, Prince2, Agile, all of these different methodologies and frameworks that you can use to deliver your projects. You just need to choose one that works best for you and for your organization. That's what I would say.
So Jay, let me come back to you. So I got the impression, perhaps incorrectly, that you weren't necessarily referring to project management. You were referring to BAU because you mentioned IT, I think.
Yeah.
But can you please just elaborate? So if you were talking more generally in terms of BAU, then please say so, and the mentors can address it from that angle. But yeah, just please elaborate to see if you think your question's been answered, or if there's a bit more that you want to ask.
I mean, for the most part, yes, it is answered, because I mean, I'm looking at it from within the IT, what currently, and I'm strictly relating to the organization currently I work for, and we are heavily utilizing on the IT side with BAU COVID. But then when it comes to my engagement with a particular program, some of the practices are being adopted directly from there. And so some of the whether it be certain communication structure, certain RACI matrix that you put together and whatnot, are directly derived from some of the components or framework which is available as part of the ISACA COVID structure. So I mean there is like in at least my organization, there's a heavily reliant on using COVID. And I have seen that within the practice, like, where I have a bit of a PMP type, background, but just from, practicing that, but that I see that, using or utilizing COVID has also generally been effective as well.
Yeah.
So it does answer, and I see the differences between the two, but at the same time, like I see there is, lots of things out there. And somebody made a statement earlier, like it's you have to tailor it to your organization. So yeah, that's the key thing I would say in summarizing or understanding what I've learned here. The key thing would be if I go from my particular organization right now to somewhere else, there might be a certain difference in the practices followed, and I would have to just tailor it for that organization.
Yeah. And I think it's the interpretation, isn't it, Jay, as well? So not only are these organizations, your organization, using COBIT and ITIL and PMI and some ISO standard and whatever you're using, but it's the individual interpretation of those different practices as well that causes an issue. I think your question is a great question, and I don't think we can answer it anyway, any of the mentors, by saying this is the one gold standard practice that you should be using or you could be using that's better than COBIT, for example. I think COBIT is obviously used in many organizations and is a good governance framework, absolutely. Let me see if there's any other mentors who want to add to this.
Yeah. Can I just add something to that, Alan? So, Jay, just going back, if it's working for your organization, then great. There are obviously different ways of doing things, and there are different ways that, and there are ways of making things better. If you, in your, as you're delivering these projects under the frameworks that you're working to, if you find that there are different ways of doing things, and that you can improve something, then by all means, certainly do that. And how you do that is by being aware of what the other frameworks are. So certainly broadening your knowledge and your understanding of project management. I mean, you can, I think it's ISO 21500 is the project management international standard. But there is also, as I've mentioned, Prince 2 is one way of delivering a project. You've got agile way of delivering projects, etc. So I think just open yourself up to understanding what those different frameworks are. Choose one that you think would work best for your organization, and if you can then start steering the organization towards that, if you think that's going to make a marked improvement in how it delivers its projects, then certainly do that. But if you're already delivering projects well, why change something that already works?
Sure, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ev. So let's move us on then. Any other questions from anyone? So Suman, Nish, Bernard, Alistair, anything on your mind from what you've heard that you would like addressed?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Okay, so if there is no more, going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, so in all seriousness, thank you, Dev. Thank you, everyone, for the commentary, the questions, being involved. Very good presentation, Dev. Thank you. And let us end it there. Oh, actually, before you all drop off, remember, if you want to book some time with Dev or the other mentors, please do so through the Slack channel where you can have a one-to-one session with them. And was anyone going to say anything, or are we all leaving? Yes.
So sorry, I was just going to say thank you to you and all the mentors. Thank you very much.
No problem, Nish. Okay, thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
One more session left to play. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.